Welcome everybody. My name is Didem Danış. I'm the chair of the Association for Migration Research. This is an association that we started in 2017 with my colleagues in Turkey. And we aim to discuss different perspectives about the migratory issues in and around Turkey. And here we are organizing a special video series about the 5th year of the EU-Turkey Statement. And today's guest is our dear colleague and friend, Ilse Van Liempt from Netherlands. She is currently working as associate professor at urban geography at the Department of Human Geography at Utrecht University. And she's a research leader on the focus area of migration and societal change and coordinator of the research masters, urban and economic geography. She previously worked at the Institute for Ethnic and Migration Studies, the famous institution in Amsterdam, and it's the Sussex Center for Migration Research. She published her PhD thesis in 2007 as a book entitled Navigating Borders by Amsterdam University Press. And since then, she has published extensively on irregular migration, refugee migration, gender, public space, diversity, inclusion and exclusion, and similar topics. So welcome, Ilse. We are very happy of having you here. I will let the floor to Ekin Ürgen for the first question.
Welcome again. Maybe we can start with a more general question. How would you evaluate the general aspects of the EU-Turkey statement? What were the expectations of the parties before the deal, and to what extent they have been met?
The general aspects of the EU-Turkey statement. What are the general aspects? Let me think. So I think the statement was built around the idea that the number of people drowning in the Mediterranean should be stopped or at least declined. But there was also the aspect that human smuggling needs to be stopped. And there was the element that the general number of irregular arrivals should be declined. And this might all seem the same, but I think there is important differences as well in terms of how you frame it. So it has quite different lines of reasoning behind it. So the time when this EU-Turkey statement was drafted was very chaotic, crisis type of situation with very high numbers of people arriving, but also very high numbers of people drowning. And I think the idea to stop the drowning is understandable from any point of view, I would say. But the set target to decrease the number of arrivals, I think, is problematic. Anybody who knows a little bit about asylum migration knows that this is a very typical migration flow that goes with peaks and lows. And it's not manageable like labor migration or student migration. So I've always found it very problematic to see in the, for example, in the EU progress report, where they report about the evaluation of the deal, that the first criteria is the decline in number of arrivals. I would have found it more logic to have a decline in deaths, for example, as a criteria. I mean, that's something that we might want to strive for or have as an aim or a shared interest. But to have a decline, pure decline in the number of arrivals, I think in itself is problematic. And I remember the Dutch Prime Minister saying at one point that the aim was to arrive at zero. So the number should be zero, which is very unrealistic. I mean, how can you have zero migrants arriving when there is a war in Syria? So yeah, the general aspect was to decline irregularity or to stop smuggling, but this then easily kind of translated into stop the number of people arriving. And another aspect, I think, was breaking the what was called the business model of smuggling. And I think that has been often the target of policy, but yeah, I've written a PhD on human smuggling, so I think it's a bit naive. I mean, a lot of research shows and a lot of examples from other border areas show that striving at stopping human smuggling in one tiny part of the border at one particular moment in time doesn't necessarily mean that smuggling will disappear, because smugglers will find other ways or other routes to bring people or to have people escape from war. So smugglers will not stop when certain laws are introduced. So that and I think people knew that, but it's of course a very political and also symbolic thing to say that you want to stop smuggling. I mean, nobody is against stopping smuggling in itself, but again, it's a bit more complicated. So looking at the bigger picture, I don't think less people arrived. I don't think less people were smuggled. There might have been some changes in the routes and in the way people arrived. What did happen was that people who arrived in Greece could no longer continue the journey. I mean, that was a very clear, concrete effect. So Greece has always been a transit place where people passed through, and now that really turned into I wouldn't say destination, but a place where people are stuck. So that's what concretely happened. Maybe another general aspect of the Turkey statement was the idea of the 1-for-1 regulation. So this idea of for every migrant who was returned, one person would be resettled. And I think this has been, if you look at the achievements, it's been a failure because it was very low numbers of migrants who have been resettled. But I did like the principle. I mean, in like the principle of thinking about legal alternatives, I think was important and an important aspect of the deal. I don't agree with how it worked out, but I think to think about legal alternatives rather than stopping migration in itself was yeah, for me that would be a way forward to have more alternative ways of thinking about offering concrete alternatives for people having to make that dangerous journey across the Mediterranean. Of course, the problem was the lack of force and the lack of power of the EU. Like there was no single state made responsible to actually meet the criteria. So it kind of remained an idea that was never really materialized, I would say.
So actually, you also described very well the different aspects of the statement, or what is called like deal on the general media. The deal has been criticized by migrant and human rights organizations on its legal and moral deficits. On the other hand, the supporters of the deal defended it on the grounds that the problem was its incomplete implementation and not the design of the deal itself. What is your take on this discussion? So do you agree that overall the statement or the deal was well written, but is it really the problem of implementation?
Interesting. Yeah. I mean, the deal has been critiqued for its legal deficits, I think for two reasons. So the fact that Turkey could not be called a safe country because of its particular asylum law or lack of law, but also the deal in itself has been under legal attack because asylum decisions are not made by EU institutions, but bilaterally with Turkey. I mean, that's under discussion as well. And morally, it's been discussed because I think most of all, because of the whole idea to trade people for money, to like shift people around and to treat them as objects who can be
And actually,
traded.
yeah, there is one more legal critique about the fact that it is a statement and it is not a legal agreement between the countries, which makes it very difficult for legal control or legal examination, you know?
Yeah,
it is
I agree.
A statement which doesn't mean really
Yeah.
text.
Yeah. But yeah, I do have to say that I also admired Gerald Krau's idea to really come up with a plan to prevent people from drowning and to do something about it. And I remember there was like 1 week in April, I think, where like 800 people drowned. And I mean, the situation was really, really, really bad and urgent. But I don't agree with this idea that the design was okay, because I think there were some serious flaws in the design itself. First of all, the whole deal was built around outsourcing, sending people back, preventing them from coming, and not taking responsibility as the EU to assess these claims, but then to rely on other countries. I think that's a flaw in the design. You cannot say that the idea is good, but the implementation failed, because for me, thinking about how this would be implemented should be part of the design. I mean, you cannot design something and not take the context into account. And I know it was crisis and everything was done fast and quick, but the geopolitical context, the political context, these elements are so crucial. I mean, they should have been part of the thinking. I think it's too easy to say, well, in theory it was okay, but then the way it was implemented, I mean, you could have speculated that this would happen. And I think access to good procedures is something that the EU should have taken up. So they should not have relied on Turkey, and to be honest, also not on Greece. So that's, I think, is a failure in the design, because Greece has always been the state within the EU with the weakest asylum situation. So, you know, there was even a time where EU states did not send asylum seekers back to Greece because they found it unethical and inhuman to have them sent back to a country where their protection was not guaranteed. And for the one-for-one rule, I think the design was also problematic, because I never understood, for example, how this could only be set up for one particular group, like for Syrians only. I don't know how you can justify that only for Syrians there is this opportunity where people could be resettled. Like, how does that fit with the Geneva Convention, where individual assessment of cases is important and not nationality, or even not how many returnees there are? I mean, your chance for being resettled, being reliant on the number of people being sent back, is, I think, problematic. And what made me also a bit uncomfortable with this trading off is the money that was given to Turkey. Well, I can understand that there is costs involved in setting up a new system, but I was really disappointed by the fact that there was no single thought about how to follow up on where the money was spent, no control mechanisms, no accountability. So it was simply outsourcing and not taking any responsibility. So I think that was part of the design of the deal, so not just implementation.
The focus of the EU-Turkey statement on returns from Greece have been subject to a lot of criticism. This is also a point that you underlined in your articles. Can you maybe explain more the implications of the statement for migrants, especially the ones who are in the islands?
Yeah, well, we have argued in our research that the most problematic part is this strong focus on return. And that really has huge implications for migrants, because it means that people have more problems getting access to protection, because there is so much effort put in trying to see if they can be sent back rather than focus on whether they can get access to protection. And this means that people have been detained, people have been obstructed in getting access to legal support. They've also not been informed about their rights. And the fact that it's not so easy to return people also means that many now are in limbo. Like they cannot be sent back, but they also don't have any help and support in getting access to protection. So waiting times are incredibly long at the island. Some people have not even been informed about interview after 1 year. People can be really, really stuck for long times. And this has all sorts of implications for their health, for their well-being. And this has been documented quite intensively. So I'm getting more frustrated about the fact that so many people have already indicated the problems, but yeah, the camps are still there. Some people we spoke to also told us that they changed their plans. So some people even like paid smugglers to be sent back to Turkey, and then from Turkey try to move somewhere else and avoid the islands. People try to fit the criteria to become classified as vulnerable so they can be transferred to the mainland. Some people even sign voluntary return because they just want to get out of the hotspots. So this is, yeah, quite dramatic and huge human rights violations. I think now the complete ignorance and absence of any measures to combat COVID-19 makes it even worse. Like there is nothing organized. The people are just left on their own. They're locked up, they're forgotten, and they're completely dependent on NGOs and volunteers. So there's no accountability there from the EU, I would say. So this is really, yeah, quite drastic in terms of implications.
So my question is about the Edirne events. You may remember the events of February, March 2020 happening at the Turkish-Greek border has been a critical moment in this 5-year period. Greece resorted to unlawful and inhuman measures in order to prevent migrants from entering its soil. These practices have been overlooked by the EU at the same time. In fact, it has been widely pointed out that this deal primarily puts the burden on Greece. What were the implications of the deal for the inner EU dynamics? I mean, like not only Greece, but for the EU actors?
Yeah, good question. Just like I think the deal outsourced responsibility to Turkey when it comes to asylum protection, the EU also outsourced to Greece and really put the burden on Greece. And there is very little willingness to help across Europe. This is also visible in the resettlement quota. I mean, there's really a lot of political debate about how many people will be taken, and then in the end of the day, even less people are resettled. I think really more power and force is needed. Now it's just up to states to decide if they want to contribute or not. So there is like a lack of accountability, really. So more solidarity is needed. And I think in the new migration pact, there is this acknowledgement that solidarity is needed amongst different EU member states. And yeah, I'm maybe a bit pessimistic, but we should at least try. Yeah.
you underline that the statement is actually is an extension of the many EU migration deals that has been established since 1990s and gradually hardening externalization policies. The statement is also presented as a blueprint for future deals to be made with third countries. And what you argue is that this approach is not socially and financially sustainable. I know it's maybe a bit broad, but what could be an alternative and a sustainable EU approach to migration?
Yes, so I think
difficult question is
difficult question. Yeah, I think a more sustainable approach is definitely needed. It's important to think about sustainability, especially because the deal was designed, as I said before, in crisis situation, very quick, very reactionary, you know, like just reacting to a specific moment in time. More sustainable solution is needed, and I don't think this should be seen as a blueprint, because it was something that was really quickly drafted with huge unintended consequences, severe human rights violations. I mean, this has been, as I said, it's been documented by so many different actors and researchers and NGOs. So I think it's scary to hear that politicians keep saying that it's been a success, like referring to this drop in the numbers at one point in time at a particular route. I mean, really not looking at the wider picture. So we need more debate about the specific context of the Mediterranean crossing, but also the geopolitical dimension in the agreement with Turkey or with Libya. I mean, you cannot just take a theoretical idea out of the context and think that it will work. Even, you know, like even when people know about these political situations. So these geopolitical relations and the power dimensions, they should be part of the design if you would want to have more agreements like this. I think what we discussed before is more important, that there is more solidarity between states and that the EU can really act together. So this idea of in the new migration pact, this is also stressed, that more collaboration is needed. But here again, return is very prominent in a new migration pact, which worries me. I think more in general, a shift in mindset is also needed in terms of how migration is portrayed and how migrants are represented. So not as intruders who come even when the borders are closed, who sneak in or who make agreements with criminals. I think that's really important. So to treat them more equal from the start, to focus on what they can contribute. Don't waste their time by putting them years and years in camps, locking them up and obstructing them. I think that would be really more sustainable, because this is, at the end of the day, it's like negative impact for everybody involved. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Ilse, for all the answers. I would like to ask you one last question. It's about the image of Turkey, because as Turkey became the main actors in the EU externalization policy in the framework of this statement, how Turkey is perceived in within European countries, for instance, in Netherlands, as you are there. We have discussed and criticized a lot the way Turkish government instrumentalized the refugees for its relations with the EU. So how they have been used as a diplomatic instrument, diplomatic tool. But at the same time, we know that Angela Merkel, for instance, the German chancellor, presented the deal as a political success. So yeah, one last question to you.
Political success, do you mean in terms of relations with Turkey?
Yeah, no. In terms of the Merkel's, as far as I know, Merkel presented the statement and the deal and the fact the migrant crossings towards Europe has decreased 94%. This is the official statement of the EU experts. So this has been presented as a success by German politicians. But at the same time, my question is about how Turkey has been perceived this framework, you know?
Yeah, it's very interesting because I think there was very little discussion about Turkey's role within the statement. So it was always about the EU and the EU's migration problem, and Turkey was just kind of like the outsourced partner. And yeah, I always wondered, like, also from Turkish point of view, like how was the deal perceived and why would people collaborate and what was in it for Turkey? I mean, it was a completely different agenda. You know, I mean, there was also the visa liberalization. It was part of EU accession agreements. So I think that often happens when you look at migration. There's like one part of migration is also tied to another part of migration. So this was like asylum migration being connected to migration from Turkish citizens to EU. I mean, it was all connected and really, really political, but there was so little discussion about these different agendas and these different positions within the deal. So it was like EU's problem, migration crisis problem. I mean, yeah, we can have a whole discussion about whether there was more of a crisis in Turkey than in EU if you look at the numbers. I mean, the number of Syrian refugees in Turkey compared to the number of refugees in EU, I mean, that in itself is uncomparable, I would say. So it was very, I would think, very Eurocentric approach as well on the deal. Like Turkey's role was not really discussed in that sense.
What is interesting is that the deal itself is not so much discussed in Turkey as well. So we hope that video interviews will help Turkish audience to think more about the deal and its impacts on migrants, refugees, but also on the states and on the host societies. So we are grateful to you for this wonderful interview and talk.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.